And so the question then that I sought to answer as I thought of getting married was, what ideals will influence my marriage? And so whether you like it or not, your perception of marriage and how you do marriage, for those that are already married, is influenced by a certain ideology. Whether you know that you're being influenced by an ideology or not, there is definitely an ideology that is influencing, if you're single, your perception of marriage, and if you're married, how you are doing marriage right now. And one of the ideologies that has greatly influenced how marriage has turned out to be is actually modern feminism, which is the conversation that we are having today. And so because somebody asked, why the repetition of modern? What do we mean? And somebody has asked, what do you mean by modern marriages? What we mean especially by modern marriages are marriages in the present time. You and I would agree that if you compare the kind of marriage that our grandparents had and the kind of marriages that we are having now, there is a huge difference. The times are different. We have technological advancement that were not then. The economic situation is different. And so by modern marriages, we mean our marriages in the present, current, modern scene. So that is what we mean. Now, because feminism is a buzzword, as I said earlier, and most of you came just because you saw the title Feminism. Because it is a buzzword. As we progress, I hope first you will hear me out. So those that came with stones, don't throw them yet. So hear me out, and then at the end of my lecture, then you can actually ask your questions. You can have your rejoinders. You can question where you perhaps feel I was not truthful and things like that. Is that okay? But ultimately, it is my hope that we will, sort of chart a better path for our marriages, especially a path that is founded on biblical truth and wisdom. Let me begin by saying it would be remiss of me if I did not accept the fact that historically, women have suffered marginalization and oppression in more ways than none. That is a good beginning point, because unfortunately sometimes when we have a conversation like this, we want to deny the obvious facts. And so it is important that we begin by establishing that historically women have suffered marginalization and oppression in more ways than one. Now, that is not to say that there aren't elements of marginalization and oppression now, but definitely we have come a long way. For example, I belong to a culture that used to, and even now practices, though in the shadows, female genital mutilation. Now, unfortunately, despite the much progress and effort that has gone into the eradication of this destructive practice, there are still some girls, even presently, who still undergo this horrendous experience, albeit in the shadows. We have to appreciate, of course, that good progress has been made even on that particular matter to stamp out this vile act completely. But a few decades ago, this was an acceptable cultural practice for many cultures and was lauded both by men and women. It was something that was supported by both men and women. My own great-grandmother, who raised me, was a supporter of FGM, or what she would call circumcision. And she couldn't understand how a girl could grow and become a grown woman, and yet she has not been circumcised. And so when I argue that women historically have gone through marginalization and oppression of some kind, this is what I mean. Now, I think there will be something wrong with you, to be honest, if you said female genital mutilation is a good thing, or is an okay thing, or is something to be accepted just because it was in our culture. I think there will be something off, and that one, don't ask a question regarding that. Just see me in private. Is that okay? But praise God that now, with the rights of women being advocated, we have won this particular war, and many others that have continued to, in a sense, oppress and marginalize women. Now, we've not ended some of these things completely, but we have made progress. Therefore, we must celebrate the positive gains that have been brought about by the striving for women's rights and their empowerment. We must celebrate the fact that girls are now accorded the same worth as boys. I am a father of both a son and 2 girls. And in my mind, I do not consider my daughters to be of less worth than my son. In previous times, that was actually the case. We must celebrate the fact that girls now have access to education, especially in mixed families where a parent has to make decisions on who they take to school, where they have both sons and daughters. We must appreciate that girls now have access to education. We must celebrate the strides made in ensuring women have equal opportunity of access into various career fields. Like my wife, who is a doctor, and me, who is just a pastor. We must celebrate the end of certain oppressive and cultural norms that inhibited the flourishing of women. We must celebrate, this was my best part. We must, I know Elder Wekunda agrees with me here. We must celebrate the increase of household incomes as a result of women working. Praise the Lord. I for sure thank God for that. Now, women movements, especially feminism, have been instrumental in providing solutions to most societal problems that women had and still have to contend with. However, most human solutions create more new problems. And feminism, and specifically today as we talk about modern feminism, is no exception. It came about as a solution to a problem that was seen, but like with every human solution, it produced more new problems of its own. And one of the areas that clearly demonstrates this is the institution of marriage. So for the purpose of our good elder, Mr. Hudson Chege, feminism, a very basic definition of it will be equality of genders. That's really it, at a very basic definition. And as we go along, you realize there is more than just an equality of genders. But at the basic of it, it is this striving for equality between men and women. It is this striving to show that women are not inferior to men, that women are of equal worth and ought to be given equal opportunities as men. So at the very basic definition, that is what we mean by feminism. Now, when I talk about modern feminism, I am talking about a specific brand of feminism. Later on, as I talk about the different waves of feminism, I will be specifically talking about the second wave and the third wave, which sort of, in a sense, connote modern feminism. Now, when we say that feminism is equality for all genders, it is important for us to realize that equality here may not mean the same things to all people. All right? And even gender, unfortunately, has taken a different form in our current world. So, for example, a rural African woman, a Saudi woman, and an American woman may have different views of what equality means for them. Recently, Saudi women were celebrating the fact that now they've been given the right to drive. That is something perhaps that the American woman does not even think about. All right? So equality means different things to different women in different contexts. Unfortunately, even gender now means different things to different people in different contexts. For example, an African and a liberal American may not have the same definition of gender. Let's get then to the three waves that contributed to the development of feministic thought and ideals. Now, feminism is both a movement and an ideology. And so for us to better understand it, it is important that we trace the development of this movement and ideology. It is better for us to situate it within its foundation and the seeds that gave rise to feminism as we know it today. The first wave began in the late 18th century, so that's the 1700s into the 19th century. So that was the first wave. In fact, the first woman feminist, and feminists would agree, and here I am talking about, intellectual feminists. I'm talking about feminists that propagate the feministic ideals. They would agree that the first woman feminist, until at least in terms of propagating this kind of ideas, was a woman by the name Mary Wollstonecraft. And she published her seminal works in 1792 by the title Vindication of the Rights of Woman. Now, she had earlier published Vindication of the Rights of Man. And what happened is these particular works by Mary, allow me to call her Mary because the second name is a bit difficult, but later she would have a daughter named Mary, but I will call her Mary Shelley to differentiate between the two. In fact, anyone that has read the book or watched the movie Frankenstein? Anyone? Okay, let me, I kept telling myself as I was preparing for this that I need to not be too scholarly. And so far, are we moving along well? Yes, so far we are moving along well. Okay. If I become too scholarly, it is still important that, because you can't discuss feministic thought and ideas without a bit of scholarship. But if I become a bit scholarly, tafadhali just say, Pastor, bado tuko kwa kanisa. And so, if you've not watched, that is okay. But Frankenstein is first a novel, and then it was adapted in a movie, and it is Dr. Frankenstein who creates this monster by basically taking different parts, from different people, and then, was able to give it life. And this monster was created that was 8 feet tall and was very ugly. Really, it was a monster. And the monster could not be loved by anyone except by a blind man who could not see the monster. And so the monster ended up, killing everyone that Dr. Frankenstein loved, and eventually killed him and committed suicide. And at the heart of what, Mary Shelley was actually communicating, that I think many feminists will not agree with me, was actually the idea that this thing we have created called feminism only exposes women to loneliness and depression. And so what happens is, as a result of the works of Mary Wollstonecraft, in 1848, about 200 women met. And they came up with 12 resolutions. And 2 of those resolutions had to do with, 1, the right to vote, and 2, reproductive rights. Now, it is important again for me to mention that the roots of feminism, these things are not happening within an African context, okay? So these things are very Western. And so some of these things have a Western connotation to them, but it is from there that these things made their way to Africa and the rest of the world. For your interest, for those of you that are interested, it would interest you to know that even among feminists, there are different kind of conversations that are happening. For example, African feminists do not accept the norms and ideals and standards that are espoused by Western feminists, because the argument is we are fighting for different things. And so that is important for us to realize. But it helps for us to be able to situate where this started, so that we may see how these particular ideologies have influenced us over time. Now, there was a simple goal to the first wave of feminism. And the goal was to have society recognize that women are humans and not property. At least as it began, that was the goal. That society would recognize women are humans and they are not property. But, interestingly, the leaders of the first wave of feminism, unfortunately, were merely advocating for white women rights. And so now, again, even in feminist discourses, you have people that are pointing back and saying, but you people only fought for one brand of women. You only fought for the white women. You had women that were still enslaved, and yet you never considered that something to actually talk about. And that already tells you the fault lines that exist within this ideology that apparently from the very beginning was meant to have society acknowledge women as human and not as property, but they will not do that for the black women that were enslaved. Second wave. Anyway, before I go to the second wave, because I may not be able to get back to that, although there was a simple goal to have society recognize that women are humans, not property, the first wave feminism found itself in the period of the Enlightenment. So you're talking about the period of the French Revolution, and there is enlightenment and reason becomes God. And so this is a period where there was a celebration of reason and there was increase in atheism. So that is where, the first wave of feminism sort of its roots came about. Now, part of that, so you had the first proponents of enlightenment, Kina Immanuel Kant, Rousseau, and people like those. But in terms of how they perceived reason, it was in very rigid terms. But then by the time people like Mary Wollstonecraft are coming and their daughters, they became what some have called the Romantics. And so Romanticism developed. And the idea was they did not want to be bound within these confines of what reason was meant to be. And part of what was actually propagated is an idea called free love. Free love, meaning I need to be allowed to love whom I want, when I want, freely. Now, we have the concept of open marriages nowadays, right? Now, before open marriages were a thing, free love was the thing. Now, obviously, a lot happened to these women in that idea. They realized free love only favors men. It's true. Free love only favors men. There's no child here at least to understand, because I want to say something. I don't want somebody's child to go asking questions at home. Are those children young enough for me to speak PG-18 language? They are young enough. Even as we develop this thought, you and I must agree that the effect of sex on a man and the effect of sex on a woman is not the same. Now, whether we want to agree or not, a man having sex with 100 women and a woman having sex with 100 men, the effect is not the same. Now, the challenge with feminism is it removes those kind of bounds and distinction. And so what free love did, really, it just gave men an open check. And eventually, people, especially like the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary Shelley and her sisters, they were really messed up by the very thing that they were propagating. And the problem with ideas is that the proponents of ideas, even when their ideas destroy them, they still have to hold on to their ideas. That is the danger of ideas. That just because I hold on to this idea, although it does not work, although it is destroying me, I must prove that this idea is true, even to the detriment of my own well-being. And so even from the first wave, which is considered the safer form of feminism, already trouble started brewing. Already. And the seeds of what we will see in the second wave of feminism, the sexual liberation of the 1960s, the seeds were already planted in the 1800s. So the second wave. And so this happens around the 1960s and the 1970s. Of course, it is built on the first wave of feminism. And now it challenges what women's role in society should be. Remember, the first wave was about society recognizing that women are humans and not property. Now, the second wave is challenging what women's role in society should be. Remember, this time you have the civil rights movement. And so that is sort of an inspiration to this push as well. And so it meant taking a closer look at why women were oppressed. And one of the things that was questioned at this time are the traditional gender and family roles. So now in the second wave of feminism, as we are wondering, why are women oppressed? Then a question is posed, wait a minute. Who said that these are the defined roles of women and men within a family context? And so traditional gender roles within the family began being questioned in this second wave of feminism. Now, within that period, a brand of feminists also arose. They are called radical feminists. And their ideas have now influenced a lot of what we suffer now. For them, they wanted to reshape society entirely because they said that the system was inherently patriarchal and only an overhaul will bring liberation. Now, when we talk about certain terms, we must be careful. When we talk about patriarchy and let's end the patriarchy, yes, the patriarchy is evil. You are only borrowing terminologies whose meaning you do not know. That is actually a push of the radical feminists. And the idea was to reshape society entirely. Influenced greatly, for example, by still the first feminist, Mary Wollstonecraft, who looked at various institutions as a barrier to the flourishing of women. So any institution that had a level of hierarchy was a barrier to the flourishing of women. Two of the notable ones that she had an issue with, one was the church and two was marriage. And so by the time the radical feminists are coming, they are looking at how society is structured and they are saying there are systems that are already set in place and these systems actually hinder the flourishing of women, and so let us abolish this system. And one of their goals was actually to abolish marriage as we know it. Interestingly, this second wave now, of course, coincided with the sexual liberation. And now women were free to do what men had been doing all along. This is the interesting thing about modern feminism as you trace it out. It moved from merely agitating for women's rights. And it moved to, this is what men have and this is what we want. Unfortunately, not recognizing not everything that men had was good. And so both the good and the bad were embraced together. The third wave. Because of the institutional victories of the second wave feminism, now women enjoyed more rights and power going into the 1990s. And they were able to think of other aspects of their identity. And now they welcomed individuality and rebellion. And this was now an era of reclaiming. Now, just wanted to recommend for you a book, and I wondered, is this even something to recommend? You know how when I'm preaching, I could recommend you, like it's a good book to read. But for you that are a bit scholarly and want to understand this, part of what shaped the third wave of feminism is, for example, Eve Ensler's works titled The Vagina Monologues. You have other works like The Gorilla Girls and The Punk Rock Riot Girls. And this shaped this third wave now of feminism. And many women now more freely expressed their sexuality in how they spoke, dressed, and acted. Now, this is the interesting thing. When the second wave feminism looked at this third wave feminists, they were appalled because the second wave feminists were trying to destroy what traditionally were held as gender distinctions. But this third wave, in their sexual liberation, were going into the extremes of trying to sexualize their femininity. In other words, we were now coming full circle. If you get the drift. It began with women being subjects of men's pleasure and bidding. The earlier feminists tried to fight that. By the time you're coming to the third wave feminism movement, in the pursuit for sexual freedom and expression, now women had handed themselves freely again to men as subjects of men's pleasure and bidding. I hope you can see that. Do you see how it has come full circle? Now, for the third wave feminism, one thing stood out. Or rather, the mantra was this: the one rule that exists is that there aren't any rules. The one rule that exists is that there aren't any rules. This now became the mantra of modern feminism. No rules exist. And that literally involved every aspect of a woman's being. No rules exist. And any system, any institution that seemed to propagate rules was to be shunned and to be done away with. So then, now that I have laid that elaborate background, I hope now you see what I'm talking about when I talk about modern feminism. I'm not talking merely about women empowerment and women rights and the gains we have made. I am talking about something else whose ideas have influenced and shaped us in ways that we do not appreciate. So let's then see what the influence of modern feminism has been on marriages, and especially the marriages of our time, modern marriages. So first, let's consider the impact of modern feminism on the concept of the family. The impact of modern feminism on the concept of the family. There's a book, The Feminist Case Against Marriage. And in the abstract, this is what the author says. Feminists have long identified marriage as a major site of women's oppression. First wave feminists sought to improve marriage by dismantling coverture. Second wave feminists called for women to abandon it altogether. In spite of many reforms and protections introduced in response to feminist campaigns, marriage is not the benign institution many people imagine it is. I hope you heard that. That marriage now was treated as a site for women's oppression. In fact, Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedman are very influential in terms of feministic thought, especially the second wave. You cannot talk about feminism if you don't mention Gloria Steinem, if you don't mention Betty Friedman. Gloria Steinem says this: the most dangerous situation for a woman is not an unknown man in the street or even the enemy in wartime, but a husband or lover in the isolation of their home. Betty Friedman, who's authored The Feminine Mystique, again another very influential book on feminism, says marriage is a comfortable concentration camp. Now, those ideas seem absurd, but really what is happening is there are seeds already that are being planted in women to abhor the institution of marriage. How does that look like, for example, in our days? It is in statements that seem to be true, but maybe the seeds and the root of it is something different. So when somebody tells me, a lady doesn't need to be married to be fulfilled. Now, it is true if you've so soaked yourself in the Lord Jesus Christ and your identity is, so rich in the Lord Jesus Christ and you're speaking from that perspective. But many of us don't realize actually the seeds of even that kind of innocent statement. Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedman. Our parents found value and worth in marriage. Not so much nowadays. In fact, let me push it even further. Part of that identification with marriage was a lady adopting the name of the husband. Ladies, and I'm not throwing stones, my own wife has not adopted my name. So I'm not throwing stones at anyone because I would have to begin with me. How many here have legally adopted the names of their husbands, those that are married? All right? Legally adopted, only 2. Okay, let me see. How many ladies are married in this space? How many ladies are married? All right. Now, this is not a case against you. Now, there are obvious reasons, it's a tedious. But a majority, ladies, if we are honest, a majority of us is because there is feministic thought that influence. Why should I take the name of somebody else? In fact, the best that you get is a hyphen on Facebook, Sarah Wavinya hyphen Mokaya. Thank God I'm not live streaming this. Otherwise, today is during Gelala wapi. You get what I mean? Even that act is influenced by feminism. And so part of what modern feminism has done in terms of its influence in marriage and family is the family, and specifically marriage, was devalued. The value that we placed on the family was lost. And so, people take time. You don't have to be married. Let me first pursue my career. Let me first pursue my dream. Because marriage is not such a big deal, right? But career is a big deal. Why? Because men were the ones who were in career. What we have done, again, remember, is we looked at everything men had and we pursued that. Okay, I mean ladies. Don't, now, gender confusion, I'm not American yet. Inherent in these thoughts by this leading feminist is the idea that the family and marriage in particular has only served to oppress and suppress women. That the institution of marriage with its hierarchical structure is seen as something to be demolished as opposed to being celebrated. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, the notable feminist Mary Wollstonecraft demanded the total destruction of all hierarchical structures, church and the marriage being the foremost. These seeds that were planted 2 centuries ago have now bloomed, and we can hear them echoed. So, for those of you that your struggle is, I did not take my husband's name, that is a particular effect of modern feminism. But what has happened now among the Gen Zs, now the full-blown effect of this has happened. Have we not heard the Gen Z say, kitu tunaogopa tu ni nini? Yes, ndoa na ujimoto. Ati? Or kukosa bundles. But now the full force of the effects of these ideas and thoughts has come home. And by the way, when they're saying that, it's not a joke. They're not saying the only thing we fear is marriage and hot porridge. They're not saying it as a joke, like literally. marriage has now come to be something to be dreaded. The impact of modern feminism on the family. How did we get here where the whole idea of family is frowned upon? It is actually years and years of painting marriage in bad light. Before you hear one person that is talking about marriage in good light, you'll have heard 9 that have told you marriage is a scam, marriage is what, it is overrated. You know all those statements. Before you can get one person that tells you, hey, I wish I got married sooner. Before you get somebody that is encouraging you like that, what do you hear? If you can stay single, please do. And by the way, because I may not be able to get to that, tied to the idea of marriage is the idea of parenting. So it's not just marriage that was seen as an oppressive thing to women. It was also child rearing. And so you notice it is in that second wave feminism that something, and we can argue whether it was a good thing or not, contraceptives came about. And contraceptives were very useful in the sexual liberation because women now could have sex the way they wanted without the consequences that are associated with it. But with that also came the abortion, movement. So Roe versus Wade, which is a classic thing that is repeated. This case that was in the US and it was passed, and now, women were allowed to have bodily autonomy. All this is coming through with the second wave of feminism. And so the impact is not just on marriage, it is on parenting as well. And right now, have we not seen the effect of that? Do we not have more and more young women that the very idea that they can have a child is abhorrent to them? I don't want to be tied down by a child. And so maybe I want marriage for the perks that comes with it, but a child, that is where I draw the line. I will tell you for a fact, if we have a conversation and you tell me you don't have a child, it will be a very difficult conversation. Because I will prove to you how it is biblical and it is natural to desire a child. So you have to prove to me how your desire is a good desire of not wanting to have a child. But these seeds were planted a long time ago and now they have germinated and have become what we see. Now, let me mention, as I'm talking about the impact of this modern feminism on the family, that these women who are proponents and propagating these ideas actually endured much brokenness in their own family lives. It is always important to understand the context through which ideas are generated. These are women that had suffered greatly in the hands of men. And so their ideas are in reaction to their own lived out experiences. There were cases of abuse, cases of abandonment and assault. These are the things that mark their relationships with men. Mary Wollstonecraft, the first feminist, her own mother was, physically battered and raped by her father. And her father would, go and have relations with other women. And yet, she was this picture of a submissive wife. But also, this same mother had favorites in terms of the children, and Mary was not the favorite. It was actually her brother. And Mary yearned for love that she did not receive from the father. And she thought, as the mother was dying, that perhaps in her last words, she'll say, "Oh, Mary, I am so sorry. I loved you, my daughter." All she said is, "A little patience and this will soon be over." In other words, keep enduring the lot and the portion that is ours as women, and it will soon be over. So by the time she's generating these ideas, she's actually generating these ideas from a point of pain. Now, a good number of us have come from broken families. But some of us have not come from broken families. And sometimes you have to look for problems from your parents so that you can fit the narrative. Right now, you try, say you came from a healthy home, or you did not suffer trauma when you were a child. You will be told you're just in denial. Because part of what also has been weaponized is victimhood. Everyone is a victim now, right? We have weaponized victimhood. And so it is important to realize that her reality and the reality of many, of these proponents of feminism are not our realities. And so somebody is reacting from pain, and yet we take that and we say, yes, let us bash the patriarchy. Let us dismantle the patriarchy. Yes, marriage is a scam. Just because your husband didn't text you the whole day, now marriage has become a scam. Ay, buana. Unfortunately, what these women failed to do is to distinguish between the natural God-given male authority with male tyrannical power. Because they faced male tyrannical power, they assumed, therefore, that the God-given male authority is wrong. And therefore, they were out to actually destroy the God-given natural male authority. But by the way, as I mentioned earlier about the free love movement, it is not just the early feminist women that had an issue with the whole marriage institution. It was also men. And modern feminism, do not be deceived, has not just affected women. Oh, I hope I will be able to say at some point, men have been greatly affected by it. Godwin, for example, who was Mary Wollstonecraft's husband, and they were married for just a few years before she died during childbirth. In fact, some biographers say if Mary had lived long enough in this marriage, maybe her thoughts would have been different. Because this was the first man that seemed to have a semblance of love towards her. But she didn't live long in that marriage because she died in childbirth. But Godwin, her husband, was of the opinion that marriage and family inhibits men and enslaves women. So while women feminists are agitating for the destruction of marriage because it is enslaving women, male feminists are agitating for the destruction of marriage because it is inhibiting men. Have you heard talk about polygamy resurfacing? That men are polygamous by nature. You have heard that kind of talk. You can't tie a man to one woman. Where do you think the seeds of those thoughts come from? To be honest, modern feminism pushed to its logical conclusion favors men. Because the initial remember, it is you looked at a man and you wanted what the man has. In other words, women were actually being propped up to be men. And the phrase that we know, what a man can do, a woman can do better. That phrase comes from that idea. But the problem is, it is not possible. In fact, what has been proved right now, again, as a result and as a consequence of feminism, is that men can be better women than women. No, it's true. It's true. Who knows Bruce Jenner, who later changed to Caitlyn Jenner? You know, the father of the Kardashians. The day she transitioned from being a man to being a woman, she was Woman of the Year that year. Men can be better women than women. That's why I'm arguing, pushed to its logical conclusion, modern feminism actually favors men and disfavors women. Because whereas polygamy is a good thing for men, at least those who have not encountered the Lord Jesus Christ, they would love to have the freedom. I don't think many women sit around thinking, oh, I wish I could have multiple sexual partners. I don't think that is the reality of women, to be honest. I don't think women sit, and they are discussing their body count. Now, it has become a thing, but for men, it is actually a thing. The more body count you have, you are the man. Teach us your ways. And so increasingly what you're seeing are more and more men shunning marriage as well. Now, of course, it doesn't help when those already married don't have nice things to say about marriage. But I would also caution us not to use our own lived experience of marriage to make judgment of the marriage institution. Just because your marriage isn't working or didn't work does not automatically mean marriage doesn't work. The two are not necessarily the same. Does that make sense? And so it is important that we are careful not to use our own lived out experience to judge the institution. In fact, as a further caution, we must be careful of calling evil that which God called good. Because when God created everything, after he had finished creation, the Bible records that when he saw all that he had made, he declared that it was very good. Genesis 1:31. And so marriage is both God's idea and it is a good idea. And no ideology should make us think differently. And so let me speak to my single brothers and sisters. If the ideas you have of marriage are, one of frightened, you're not so sure, and you're scared of this thing, and it looks like an evil thing and a bad thing, go back to the Lord. And first begin by confessing that you have called evil that which God has actually called good. You have embraced and consumed ideologies whose roots are actually the pushing away of God, because it was not just the marriage institution that was being demolished. Remember, it was also the church institution. Anything that had hierarchies, and ultimately the aim was to push away God as far as possible. And so do not call evil that which God calls good. In fact, I must add, we must go back to encouraging our young people to get married early. Me, I feel I got married very late. Me, if I had known these things, mapema, immediately after campus, just salary ya kwanza hivi ikiingia next month ninaoa. Now I can afford to fend for a home. Let me press. This is not even in my notes. And tomorrow I will be your pastor. Today I'm just a lecturer, okay? So please, tomorrow come and still hear the gospel. Let me press this further. Because we want to deny reality and facts. So, it is true that as age continues to advance, even fertility does what? Decreases. That is a reality. Now, that is not a conversation modern feminists would have me talk about, but it is a reality that we must grapple with. If it is a reality that we must grapple with first, and two, if the family unit and marriage in particular is an important thing, then what does that mean? Then it means as I am prioritizing a career, as I am prioritizing further studies, I am also prioritizing what? Marriage. Why is it that I can put effort and energy and money into this pursuit of a career growth, and yet I am not doing the same for marriage? And so I put a lot of work here, but for marriage I say in God's time. And it is true, but it is such a Christian way of coping out sometimes. Because when it comes to me doing my masters, it is not in God's time I will do my masters. Right? If money allows. But when it comes, Kwani God is only concerned about one aspect of our lives. There's only one aspect of our lives that is important for God. It's like, where career, you do your thing, but marriage, this is where it's at. This is where you must seek me, and until you hear a voice saying, this is your time now to get married, do not get married. Why? And as believers, by the way, we must be very careful of using Christianese and using spiritual language to cop out of situations. At the heart of it, to be honest, is the fact that we do not prioritize the family. The seeds were planted by Mary Wollstonecraft. And then they were watered very well by the likes of Gloria. And now we are living that particular reality. Secondly, the impact of modern feminism on gender distinctions. Now, this is where you remove your stones, but don't throw them yet. Just hold on to them. You will throw them at the Q&A. Now, the greatest effect of modern feminism is perhaps the erasure of the natural and socially accepted gender distinction. Radical feminists, and I am careful in the terms that I am using. So when I say radical feminists, take that. When I say modern feminism, take that. Because I don't want to lump everything together. Is that okay? So radical feminists have pushed for more than equality for women. They have pushed for whatever gender distinctions that are there to be removed. And so the first way in which they have removed gender distinctions is, unfortunately, even on the very definition of gender. So let me mention that the fruit especially of that kind of thinking, this removal of gender distinction that found itself in a redefining of gender, is what led to the transgender movement. The transgender movement, as we have it in the West right now, for those that are wondering what is the transgender movement, this is this idea that being a man or a woman is not a function of biology. It's a function of feelings. So if I go home today as a man, and then as I am resting from a hard day's labor, I feel a certain type of way. Then tomorrow, if I come and declare to you, from today, I, Elijah Mokaya, I will be Esther Makai, then you should accept. And I know I've oversimplified it, to be honest. But I must say, luckily I'm not in America. It is absurd. It is an absurd idea. And that is why I am using such absurd illustrations to illustrate it. But really, the transgender movement finds its context and its history in feminism. When you read Mary Wollstonecraft, the whole idea that she pushed was that females should not be considered as women, but as human. Females should not be considered as women, but as humans. And so it seemed like a noble thing, this push for the humanity of the genders. But inherent in that was this desire to remove whatever distinctions existed. Now, I am not so sure what Mary had in mind is what we have right now. But ideas develop. Ideas evolve. And this is what we have now. In fact, there's a book that I was reading in this period as I was preparing by a lady called Carrie Grace. Carriegres. This I can recommend. So the book is called The End of Woman. It has a longer title, but that's the main title, The End of Woman. And she actually bemoans this very fact. This is what she says. Feminism, the ideology dedicated to smashing the patriarchy, has instead made male lives the norm for everyone. After 50 years of radical feminism, we can't even define woman. She further says, feminism has abolished women. Hulking trans women thrash female athletes. Mothers abort their baby girls. Drag queens perform obscene parodies of women. Females are enslaved for men's pleasure, or they enslave themselves. Feminism doesn't avert these tragedies. It encourages them. The carefree binge of self-absorption that has left women exploited, unhappy, dependent on the state, and at war with men. And still, feminists cling to their illusions of liberation. In fact, I remember a few years back, there's a documentary by a guy called Matt Walsh. And I don't know if YouTube, I think YouTube had flagged it down. I don't know if it is still up. It's called What is a Woman? Like, that is the title of the documentary. And really what Matt Walsh was doing was just going around the states in America asking people, what is a woman? A simple question, right? If I asked you, you will be able to tell me who a woman is. In fact, we should not even ask that question. Interestingly enough, Matt Walsh could not find an answer to that question. No one wanted to commit to attempt a definition of a woman, lest you are misogynistic and you are all those manner of slurs that are labeled against people. Gender distinctions were removed. And at the heart of that is the very definition of gender. In fact, there's a judge of the Supreme Court in the US, an African-American woman, called Ketanji Jackson. And part of when, she was being grilled at the Senate, and so she was asked by this senator called Blackburn, define the word woman. I can't, she replied. You can't? Blackburn said, not in this context. I am not a biologist. She said, I'm not an expert in gender studies. I am not well versed with biology. I am a legal professional. And so the question you're asking me is a preserve for biologists. This is the effect of modern feminism. And as a result of this erasure of gender distinctions, this is what we are now witnessing. Masculinized girls, feminized boys, and delayed and confused marriages. When you're raising a boy, how do you raise that boy to be a man? Yet the distinctions of genders have been removed. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean for a boy to be a proper boy? What does it mean for a girl to be a proper girl? In fact, let me add, part of what had happened, because I remember hearing that thought, it had come even to Kenya, is like we need not be these backward traditional people when you're raising boys and girls at history, you're giving your boys cars and such toys, and then you're giving your girls dolls. You should just give them everything. It's not a must that you're dressing your boy in blue and then you're dressing your girl in pink. And we said you should allow them to experience everything and to choose for themselves. And it seems on the surface of it like a very good idea. Then guess what started happening in the US? As children started struggling with gender identity, so a boy, for example, feels they are a girl, they were asked the question, when did you discover you are a girl? And this is the answer that they will give. I realized when I was young, I just liked pink. It was a setup all along. So you're asked to remove whatever it is that seem to be gender distinctives allowable by society. And then when you do that, that becomes the same thing that is used against you later. And that, when that boy answers that way, it is acceptable. It is true, we affirm you. And before the parent can get in, chapwa puberty blockers, kidogo kidogo, when you get to an age where, surgery can be done, and before you know it, it's a complete mess. Now, of course, this seems uko ni America. But as somebody said, when New York sneezes, Nairobi catches a cold. These things are here with us. We have masculinized girls. We have feminized boys. We have delayed and confused marriages. Our marriages have become confused. We do not have gender distinctions. It is hard to know what it means to be a husband. It is hard to know what it means to be a wife because we are progressive. Right? Anyway, I'll come to gender roles as my second thing. But I must mention here that we need to seek to find out what masculine virtues should be celebrated and what feminine virtues should be celebrated. We can be equal in worth, but yet still different. Equality does not mean sameness. It doesn't. Let's look at gender roles as an effect of this removal of gender distinctions. And this is perhaps the greatest of this erasure. A conversation around gender roles, and especially in marriage. By the way, as I was preparing, it just hit me. There's a reason why nowadays the language of partner is used a bit more. This is my partner, this is my partner, because that is what partnership connotes. In partnership, there are no distinctions. The next time I hear you telling me this is my partner, is he your husband or is she your wife? Hii language ya partner tuachane nayo. Now, the question we must ask is, are there defined gender roles in marriage? Now, those that are already married, I hope you can answer that question. But those that are not married, I beseech you by the mercies of God, before you get married. And by the way, those who registered for PMCC, we will meet tomorrow after church to chat a way forward before you solemnize those marriages. One of the questions we will answer is this. If you're about to get married, have a sit down and settle. Are there distinct gender roles? And by the way, when I'm talking about gender roles, I'm not even necessarily going into the specific, the nitty-gritties. Nani atakuwa anaosha vyombo? Siku hizi kuna nini washing? Nini nitangu aje kuosha vyombo? Dishwasher. Nani atakuwa anaosha nguo? Siku hizi kuna washing machine. Nani atakuwa anapika? Siku hizi watu wako na pesa, you can hire a chef if you're nini, or you can have a house help. I'm not even talking about those small things, but I'm talking about at a principal level. Are there distinctives when it comes to roles? You must have those conversations. Are there differences in what is expected of both genders? What does it mean to be a husband? And what does it mean to be a wife? Let me throw it here. It's a question I ask myself, kitambo. Maybe our women can help me answer that question. There's a time I thought, kitambo, what is in it for a man in marriage, in modern marriages now? Let me ask why I'm asking that. Today is thought-provoking questions, okay? So, the traditional roles that were there are no longer there, right? So, mwanaume wa Kikisii kitambo ukifika nyumbani ugali moto inachapwa kwa meza. Na lazima ikuwe moto. Okay? So those things are not there now, and you know the other things. All right? So, but, yeah, prepared by her. Si ati Glovo, sijui nini. Atoke kazi, ile masaa atafika ingie wapi? But men are still expected to perform traditional roles. I hope you're getting where I'm going with this. So we are fighting traditional gender roles, but we're only fighting them to the extent that it affects ladies. If a man doesn't provide, there is a huge problem. But if a lady doesn't cook, there's no problem. You get what I mean? If we are to have a conversation on traditional gender roles, it must be a holistic conversation. And let me tell you, because we are not having those kinds of conversation, what is happening is people get into marriage and they are disillusioned. Oh, my single friends, do not lie to yourself, thinking love without having a conversation about these things will see you through. Or thinking I love this person so much, me hata akishindwa kupika nitampikia. Even if my husband does not have a job, me I am willing to provide. It is okay. Think those thoughts now. But you must ask yourself difficult questions, and then the two of you must have difficult questions. You must do a scenario analysis. What if this happens? What if this happens? Because the biggest challenge we have right now is unmet expectations that are never spoken. So let me just ask, for the sake of asking. Should the man view himself as the primary provider, protector, and procreator? And should the woman view herself as the primary nurturer and homemaker? Are these merely sociocultural concepts, or do they find their underpinnings in the scriptures? Me, it's a question I'm asking you. Don't ask me to answer it for you. Modern feminism finds the very thought of distinct gender roles abhorrent. And maybe these home type roles seem a bit out of touch with our present realities. Like I've mentioned, nowadays, to be honest, we have very many things. And I must add, for husbands that are here that are still very African and traditional, I think, not the Lord, I think the loving thing for me to do for my wife, who's working so hard and has brought another income into the family, and I am enjoying the benefits of it, I think the loving thing for me would be get a washing machine. She doesn't have to worry about, the clothes. Get a house help that can help with house chores. What else? All those things. I think, not the Lord, revise my notion of whose food I can eat. Revise my, I think, not the Lord. That maybe the loving thing would be that. In terms of the nitty-gritties of home life. So let me give you an example of how it plays out in my home. Because I've thought about many of these things. So before we got married, we agreed with my wife, based on our understanding of scripture, I am the primary provider. She is the primary homemaker. Si niliwaambia yeye ni daktari. So I married her before she graduated. So she graduated from my house. Immediately after, she began internship. She just ate my salary maybe for 1 month or 2. After that, my salary started bowing to her several times. But I am still the primary provider. And she's still the primary homemaker. What we confuse in terms of our understanding of these things is we go to the nitty-gritties. What that meant for us is, if anyone has to stay at home and take care of the family from home, it cannot be me, hata kama mshahara yangu ndio ndogo. I'm saying according to us. I'm not saying apply that to you. I'm giving you an example of how we applied what we knew. Okay? What that meant is, if I get a pastoral job in America, we can go as a family. But if she does, we cannot go. I am the one who leads. Me, I'm telling you practically, all these things are applied practically. And let me tell you, it was not a joke, because after some time when we got our daughter in Tisari, my wife had to stay home for almost 2 years. It was a hard decision, because the bigger salary was now sitting at home. And we had to make lifestyle adjustments. But like I said, ideas and ideologies have consequences. The only thing is, you must ensure that the ideology that influences your practice is thoroughly anchored on the scripture. Now, you must not necessarily do what I did. But at least for you, whatever decision you make should not just be out of a fad, a fashion thing that is happening. Now, does it mean because she's the primary homemaker, she's the one that is doing everything at home, Not necessarily. In fact, the initial days of our marriage, I did much of the cooking. Okay, in my head, it was like, sasa wewe ndio umekuja kwa nyumba yangu. So now, I must treat this. I almost became a romantic there, and I was really trying to avoid going that direction. But you get my drift. But when we do not have these gender distinctions and these arguments, of partnership and all that, what happens is what you have is confusion. So let me give you an example of something I had. This guy grew up in a home where it was the mother who used to lock the door. And this lady grew up in a home where it was the father who used to lock the door. For 3 months, they stayed without the door being locked. Because everyone assumed door locking is a function of wives. And this one is assuming door locking is a function of husbands. So hakuna mtu anashughulika, mtu anaenda tu analala. 3 months later is when discovered, Allah, we have not been locking the house. These things seem obvious, but if you're not having those conversations, because times have also changed. The norms that were there in our forefathers are not the same norms that are there now. And so there needs to be robust conversation. Even those that are still married, there are still areas that we need to continue having discussions. In the morning, I asked my wife that question. Do you think this statement is true? That the man is the primary provider, protector, procreator, and the woman is the primary nurturer and homemaker? Kanambia, we'll have that conversation when I come back. But if we remove this conversation about the nitty-gritties of the home, one conversation that we must ask and answer is the man, is the husband the head of the home? And should the wife submit to the husband? And what does that mean and look like? Now, that we can't escape. Vyombo is neither here nor there. Who cooks on what day is neither here nor there. But the question of headship and submission and what that means and looks like, that one you can't escape. That one we must be able to answer and respond. But the thing about modern feminism in its destruction of gender distinctions is, see, we are partners. Have you ever heard that there is a head? Especially if it's not, how you have like managing partner, that kind of a thing. I am talking about a proper partnership. There's no head over the other. We are partners. We are equals. That kind of a thing. So when you bring the conversation of headship, then what you're actually saying, which is the challenge with this conversation, and how modern feminists have pushed us, it's like you're saying, I am inferior to you, when I merely appeal. And so, what has happened, you thought the effect is merely on women. What has happened, and my experience with younger men, now there are more and more men that are not taking headship. How can I imagine that in my home, I am the head of that home? What am I making of my wife? She's equally learned as I am. She's equally earning as I am. No. We will figure a way of making decisions. We'll figure a way of running the home. But this distinction that there is one who is the head of the home, no. That thing we don't believe. Including, by the way, because some of them are believers, including a revision of how we interpret and read biblical texts. So that you can't run away from. You must answer, if you're married, what headship and submission mean and look like. If you're not married, you must resolve in your heart before you get married. Is this what God requires of us in marriage? And what does it mean? And what will it look like in our context? Very important. But what has happened, unfortunately, is we have become scorekeepers. And so the idea of service and sacrifice have been frowned upon. And because of this language of partnership, if I've done something for you 2 times, you should also do it for me 2 times as well. My time is run out. Let me try rush so that we have sufficient time for Q&A, which is where I hope much of our conversation will be. Gender treatment, again, as an offshoot of this destruction of gender distinctions. Now, it has been a common understanding throughout history that men and women are different and therefore are to be treated differently. Now, because of these acknowledged differences, there is a concept that has been practiced over time. It's called benevolent sexism. I know you know sexism to be such a bad thing. It is actually not a bad thing. It depends with what type of sexism we are talking about. Benevolent sexism refers to the actions towards women that treat them with gentleness and care. It refers to, for example, chivalrous acts. Okay? So, if I open a door for a lady, if I open a door for my wife, it's a chivalrous act. Okay? I am showing deference to her. I am treating her with gentleness. The way I will speak to Pastor James is not the way I will speak to our elder here. Because I am acknowledging she is a lady. I can be a bit rough with Pastor James. I may not be rough with a lady. Yeah? Yes? So that's benevolent sexism. You know, if you're going out for dinner, and because the lady must look good, she has come with a, is it called what? Only a strapped dress. And it is in July. And it is at night. And you have gone with your tuxedo. Akianza kusikia baridi, what do? You remove your jacket and you cover her. That is benevolent sexism. Now, modern feminism does not allow that. Dare you try do that to a modern feminist? Because you have thought of me as inferior to you, and therefore you are condescending towards me. And so even a good thing now has been treated badly. In fact, I remember reading a meme, a joke. And so this modern feminist is alone in her bedroom. And she says, oh, I wish I had a man to cuddle me. And she said, what is this? I'm a feminist. I don't need any man. There's a problem with. You know, in times of war, for example, women and children are given first priority. If someone has to die, it will be who? It will be the man. These are things that we have accepted as a society. But now, when you start removing those gender distinctions, it is not men that have a problem with that. It is actually modern feminists. And what has happened over time, because of a removal of even gender treatment, is now young men are treating young women as men. Young men are rough with young women. Oh, the era of a young man speaking gently and smoothly to a lady, oh, that ended. I pity my young, sisters. You will never know what it means to be wooed by a man properly. Unfortunately. Because we've lost this. You will never know what it means to kuchora map. You will not know what that is. Even now, they don't know what that is. Because men now are treating you like a guy. Will you be my girlfriend? Oh, give me time. They have moved on. They don't have time to. You wait. You continue. This is a real effect. And by that, I'm not joking. This is a real effect. But the other effect, even worse, is men are not even pursuing ladies anymore. They're not even pursuing ladies anymore. And I mean both those who are not married and us. Us who are married, Mungu atusamehe sana. Because the moment aliingia box, we moved on with life. And yet there is a sense in which pursuit doesn't end with the wedding day. There's a sense in which you've still been called to pursue them, to pursue their hearts. And after this, I will go and apply these lessons myself. Somebody is asking, are they pursuable? No, by the way, just a thought on that, by the way. The responsibility of man is to pursue. the responsibility of the lady is to receive. And so, if a man is really wooing and pursuing, and there's no reception on the other end, then the lady also is failing on her duty. And it comes in various ways. So again, how I apply these things. This is me, not you, okay? How I apply. My understanding of me being the head of my home is that I lead in conflict resolution. So this is how I apply my understanding of scripture, okay? You don't have to apply it. You go and wrestle with scriptures and see if it fits your bill. But how I apply headship and me as the leader of my home is I believe I ought to lead in conflict resolution. Now, even worse, even when I am the one who is offended. So when my wife offends me, that is the hardest. Because I have to swallow my pain and hurt and you will know, and I have to figure a way in which we can amicably resolve the issue. Now, my wife's responsibility is to respond to my pursuit. That is part of pursuit, as I say it. And so if I initiate a step towards conflict resolution, she has a responsibility to respond to it. She can't harden, otherwise she will not be able to move. Does that make sense? And so these things are very practical. So when I say you must have a conversation on headship, and you must have, and what it means and what it looks like. This idea of gender difference, let me just give an example. I was introduced to it, interestingly, many years back when I was still in campus. We had gone for a burial of a friend. I think a friend had lost, was it a mother or a grandma? I can't remember, but we had gone with some friends. And these people who take pictures during funerals and weddings and all that. So we had gone with a friend of mine who'd also gone with the girlfriend. So this person comes with a picture of the girlfriend. And me, ghetto boy, thinking, this is how these things go. I tell my friend, hey, bana, nunulia mresh picture. The girl was offended. What do you mean, aninunulia? Kwani mimi sina pesa yangu? They're wondering. It was a good gesture from my end. Do you think that boy will ever buy something for her? Because you do not want to be considered chauvinistic. You do not want to be considered misogynistic. So even good things you end up not doing because they may be misinterpreted as you're demeaning me, you're condescending towards me, and so, wachaika. Thirdly, the impact of modern feminism on gender wars. Now, anyone here who has ever heard the term manosphere? Is there anyone that has heard the term manosphere? Hey, today is information overload. So, manospheres are websites, blogs, and online forums that essentially promote masculinity and oppose feminism. So when I mention names, you probably will know. Anyone has heard Andrew Tate? Andrew Tate, we know. Okay, let's come to Kenya. Anyone knows Amerix? Amerix, yes, kwanza leo ni masculinity Saturday. I am keeping you here and you want to go and say, Amerix ametuambia nini leo? So that's manosphere. And what happened is, as a result of modern feminism, gender wars all of a sudden started arising. Now, what happened with the, as modern feminism progressed, is there was this obvious, kind of thought, like almost a hatred for men. Now, what is happening is now men are retaliating. And so the likes of Amerix, unfortunately, when you read, there are some good things he seems to advise men. And then now you get to some things that get really dark. And it is not now an opposition to feminism. It is actually now an opposition to females. And so what has happened over time is now there are these gender wars that have developed. And rather than see each other as equal in worth and created in the image of God, and forge together towards accomplishing certain God-given purposes, now we have seen each other's as enemies. And me, who did not exist in the times of my forefathers, I have to pay for the sins of my forefathers, because the patriarchy oppressed and has continued to oppress women. And unfortunately, what happens is we bring activism to the home. That is actually the unfortunate thing. Activism, the front of activism, unlike Gen Zs who are going to the streets, people are actually bringing the wars to the home. So our marriages are struggling, because now each gender exalts itself as the better and pits itself against the other. In fact, somebody asked, could this be the reason why now, the traditional, African traditional religion has become a thing? And guess who are the people that are being attracted to African traditional religion? Men. It is men. Because over time, what happened, there was this sense of emasculation, and our men are trying to get back the power, so to speak. And now they are going to a system that they feel affirms them in their masculinity. Unfortunately, only affirms the toxic elements of their masculinity. And unfortunately, what now we have are gender wars. The radical feminists propagated this man-hate kind of ideology, and now there have risen men promoting hate for women. Ultimately, both the radical feminists and these toxic men are aiming at one thing. It's a quest for power. It's a quest for power. Ultimately, who will have the power? Be careful not to bring cultural wars to your home. Because the idea of marriage is that of oneness. And please come for the conference on the 26th. With each party working for the health and flourishing of the marriage. Your husband, ladies, is not all men. And your wife, guys, is not all women. Don't bring cultural wars to the home. Single people, watch out. Your attitude towards people of the opposite sex. That will determine the kind of relationship you build and eventually have. But also it will determine constantly what you're thinking. You'll be in this relationship and it is almost as though you're waiting, what will this man do? And you can easily interpret every action through the lenses of the ideology that you believe. And so what has happened is these wars have left both parties unhappy, and they have furthered the notion that marriage is a scam. But marriage is a team sport, and each team member must work for the good of the team. When the team flourishes, then the individual also flourishes. But when the team suffers, even the individual suffers. Because of the promotion of individualism, everyone is seeking to be happy. Everyone is seeking to be fulfilled. Everyone is seeking to get. The question is, you're getting from what? If both are seeking to get. But if we think of marriage as a team sport, I am bringing my contribution for the flourishing of the team. She is bringing her contribution for the flourishing of the team. What happens? The team eventually flourishes, and in return, I also flourish. The good of the community ultimately is what produces the good for the individual. You cannot attain happiness with an individualistic pursuit. It just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. We must see ourselves not as competitors, but rather as complementing each other. Now, I don't even have time to continue on that rant about individual autonomy. But let me just summarize by saying, when you consider modern feminism, especially the radical feminists, in the second wave, And now we are in a fourth wave that is interesting. It's not even been described well yet. They sought to accomplish three things. One was autonomy, which is the choice to decide the outcome of one's life. Two was agency, which is the ability to make moment-by-moment choices. And three was emotional freedom, the ability to exercise autonomy and agency without feeling guilty. Now, whereas autonomy and agency have been attained in various ways, none of the women who have exercised these to the uttermost have experienced emotional freedom. So I want bodily autonomy, for example. I want agency to make whatever decision I want at whatever time I want. But when they pursued that to the uttermost, because emotional freedom was also a pursuit, I want to do all these things without feeling guilty, they did not attain emotional freedom. Mental anguish has marked many of those who have pushed these things to the extreme. In the words of Matthew Arnold, freedom is a really good horse to ride, but you have to know your destination. Unfortunately, freedom was sought for freedom's sake, and no wonder we have arrived where we have arrived. In the next 5 minutes, allow me then to attempt a biblical response to all this, and then we will invite questions and answers. The Bible is crucial in helping us chart a healthy path for our marriages, despite the present circumstances that we live in. And so first, we must consider the equality of the genders, not based on any other ideology, but based on what God has to say about the matter. Before the likes of Mary Wollstonecraft, before the likes of Steinem, before the likes of all these people, came about to agitate for what they consider to be the equality of the genders, God had already settled the matter. The Bible declares, Genesis 1:26-7, then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God created both man and woman, and he bestowed upon them equal worth. And what was the worth of both? It was that they were image bearers of God. That was the worth that God placed at the very beginning. Equality of worth was given by God. Unfortunately, as I had mentioned, the radical feminists, and again, notice how I'm using my terminologies. What they sought, unfortunately, was not this kind of an equality, but rather it was, this is what men have, this is what we want, and they took both the good and the bad. However, we should pursue the highest intrinsic worth, which is the fact that we have been created in the image of God. And I think this will be very helpful, both for men and women, because it will refocus our source of identity so that we are not crushed when we lose certain things that we have allowed to define our identity. So, for example, as a practical application, a stay-at-home mom should not despise herself because she's not in the corporate space, because her worth is in God. And this is important because, again, the radical feminists will have something against the stay-at-home mom, because you're not espousing the values of what we are trying to achieve here. This is what we are trying to dismantle. You are a caricature of a woman that we need to bring down. But a stay-at-home mom should be comfortable in her skin and find fulfillment in the fact that my worth is not that I'm in the corporate or not. My worth is in the fact that I am created in the image of God. And even better, if you know Christ, your worth is found in the fact that you're a child of God. A husband who loses his job and the family has to depend on the income of the wife does not become toxic because he is secure in his identity that is in God. These are the practical implications of anchoring our identity in God. by God's grace, as I shared, by the time I was marrying my wife, God had so helped me in my identity that even when she brought in the larger income, to be honest, it didn't affect me much. In fact, I am the one who manages the finances of the home. And so, everything comes to the same pot, and I am making very serious and hard decisions. I'm not considering where the money has come from. But in the event that a husband loses a job, that should not crush them. But unfortunately, because we are not thinking of our identity in these terms, what happens is now the husband begins becoming toxic. And all of a sudden, the advancement of your wife becomes a threat. And you start tearing her down with your words. You start trying to assert your masculine control and power over her because you're feeling inferior as a man. What you need to do is deal with your identity. Secondly, the dynamic of relating. The question that haunts us in these present modern times is how marriages can still thrive when women are so empowered. Somebody asked that question somewhere. Many have a view of marriage in which the husband was either the sole breadwinner, kitambo, what we used to know, or was the custodian of the factors of production. So even those of us that had mothers that worked, still the land belonged to who? The house belonged to who? Na huko mlikuwa mnaishi kulikuwa kwa nani? So that was our reality, but that reality has changed now. So times have changed. Women are also bringing in an income. Sometimes they are bringing the most income. And by the way, this is an aside. I have so much to say and I don't have time. By the way, the changes in the income disparity is partly because of the empowerment of women, but it is also because of changes in technology that have affected the economic scenes. So what has happened is, a while back, the kind of works that were present and that, could earn people more were the kinds that required physical strength. And that is why men were the ones that were earning, because they were the ones with physical strength. Now, times have changed, and what is required is creativity and, all these other things. And sometimes women are better in those things than men. And so what has happened is now women flourish in the corporate space compared to men, not necessarily sometimes because, there's an intentional systemic thing happening, but it's because we must be aware that a shift happened. And now the kind of works that exist do not merely require physical strength. Utapiga gym mwaka yote and you will earn nothing because your muscles will not produce for you anything. And so that is important for us to realize. So then, what do we do in those kind of marriages? What do I do? My wife maybe wants to progress in her career, and I have seen this trajectory. Akiendelea hivi, sitawahi muona. What do I do? How are we to think of marriages in these present times? How should a Christian household then look like? Here, we must seek biblical wisdom. And the Proverbs are a good source of that. Let me tell you, when I thought about this text, I laughed. Because I realized many people don't like this text. So let us consider the Proverbs 31 woman. Because we are always thinking that what we have, just came in the last few decades. No. We have a woman several centuries back that was as empowered as they get. And what lessons can we learn? Now, let's read Proverbs 31, verse 10 to 31. Proverbs 31, verse 10 to 31. Proverbs 31, verse 10 to 31. An excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She's not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is in vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. Now, this woman is more like the modern woman, and then some more. She's industrious, she's enterprising, but she also caters for the affairs of her home. It doesn't have to be either or, at least as I am reading the Proverbs 31 woman. In her culture, one would argue, when women didn't do much beyond the home, she did it all. Now, what lessons then can we learn? Now, I want us to consider the subtle lesson brought forth here. And you may even actually miss it if you're not careful. Verse 11 to 12 says, her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. And then verse 28 to 29, her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Now, look at what is happening here. This is a very empowered woman. This is a woman who is a go-getter. She has such a niche for business. She goes out there. She's making a profit. She's buying land and she's, doing this business and it is very profitable. But her husband doesn't demean her. Her husband doesn't put her down. Rather, the Bible tells us he has full confidence in her. Her husband has full confidence in her. It seems that the husband encourages her and cheers her on, and as a result, the husband lacks nothing good. I think there are lessons for us, both husbands and wives, from this passage. How do you deal with an empowered woman if you are a man? How do you deal with a wife who is flourishing and thriving? Be like this man. Have confidence in her. Cheer her on. Encourage her. Call her those sweet names. I'm really struck. I'm such an African. I can't say those sweet things in public. Hey, where? And so, husbands must do that. But on the other hand, the Proverbs 31 woman, just because she's industrious and she's enterprising, she doesn't despise her husband. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She's not a headache to him, but a blessing. This, I think, is a well-functioning marriage that you and I can borrow them. In fact, the husband is not even jealous of his wife's achievements. He's not looking at his wife's achievement and thinking, wow. Why couldn't I think of that idea? No. Rather, the Bible tells us, he praises her. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. I think, I've never been a lady, but I think the saddest thing for a lady would be, you're such a big boss lady out there in the corporate, and then you come home, it is all trashed. But imagine if you're such a big boss lady out there, and then you come home and you find this man that is calling you the B word and the S word, and and saying, you can do it, you are doing it. You're wondering what the B word is and the S word is. You better be saying them at home. Sitawafunza kila kitu. Men only meeting. Maybe one day I'll have a session with the young men on the art of pursuit. Young men only. If you buy me coffee, young men, we can have that conversation. Unmarried men, that is. Look keenly, and you can, in a sense, see love and respect at play in this marriage. And by the way, on the 26th, we'll be going into details about some of these things. And so one might ask, why do we always talk about the Proverbs 31 woman? Who is the man equivalent to the Proverbs 31 woman? Hiyo ndio swali inaulizwa, si ndio? Who is equivalent? Mnatuambia tu hapa Proverbs 31, Proverbs 31. Kwani yako wapi Proverbs 31 man? Exactly. The book of Proverbs is written to a man. That's why there is the refrain, my son, my son, my son. Proverbs chapter 1 to chapter 29, that is the man. And so for all of us here desiring a Proverbs 31 woman, the question is actually up to 31, the middle portion. Because the Proverbs 31 woman is just a section of 31. So from Proverbs chapter 1 to Proverbs chapter 31, a portion of it. Now that is the kind of man. If you have that kind of man, and you have the Proverbs 31 woman, now that is a flourishing, functioning, modern marriage. But you can't be lazy and expect a Proverbs 31 woman and that marriage to function. Laziness has been disadvised, sindio? You can't be careless with your speech and expect your marriage to function with a Proverbs 31 woman, because the Proverbs have a lot of wisdom on speech. You can't be wandering with your eyes and with other organs of your bodies and yet expect for your marriage to flourish and function with a Proverbs 31 woman, because, have you not read, drink water from your own cistern, siko hapo? In other words, the men should labor to be from Proverbs chapter 1 to Proverbs chapter 31, a portion of it. And then the ladies should labor to be the Proverbs chapter 31 women. And let me tell you, that whole idea of marriage is a scam, will end forever. But because we don't want to heed the wisdom of God, it is easy for us to take ideologies from elsewhere and to make our marriages a battle ground. Lastly, a celebration of marriage. Psalm 68:6 says, God sets the lonely in families. God sets the lonely in families. Contrary to popular opinion, the marriage and the family and marriage in particular is actually a good thing. So good that this is the place where God places those who are lonely. So forget all the noise suggesting that marriage is a bad thing. It is actually a good thing. And I know there are people here whose experiences of marriage have not been pleasant, but that is not an indictment against marriage itself. It could be that one party or both parties didn't do what they were meant to do. But I can bet, if both parties do what they need to do, then a marriage flourishes. Usually it is either one party that has failed or both parties that have failed to be faithful in playing their part. Marriage is a good thing. But marriage is also work. Just because it is a good thing doesn't mean it will be good for you. You must work it. Wahenga hawakutupaka mafuta kwa mgongo wa chupa walipotuambia ukiona vielea. Yes. Kwa hivyo kama haundi yako haitaelea, it will sink literally and otherwise. And so for the singles who are here, change your view of marriage and seek to follow the wisdom of Scripture. And for those of us who are married, beware of the ideologies that influence how you relate. Seek to live out your marriage using the wisdom of God. He created it and therefore knows best how it should be lived out. God bless you.